Hey, Robin.
Hi, Leah.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Do you feel willing to share your age or what year you were born or something?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was born in 1957. I'm 63.
Okay. And where were
Yeah,
where were you born and where were you raised?
I was born in Northern California, and I was raised in Southern California at the beach in Los Angeles for most of my years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, we moved to the beach when I was around 9, but before that, we lived in a town called Altadena,
Hmm.
and I maybe it's a figment of my imagination, but I think I vividly remember seeing the horizon on fire during the Watts riots,
Oh, wow.
and just watching the newscasts and all that went on during that episode in Los Angeles's history.
Did you have like your parents, your grandparents nearby, or older people who talked with you about what was going on, or like?
Just my mother. I was raised by my sisters and I were raised by my mother, a single parent. And as best she could, she tried to describe what was going on.
Mhm.
Um, at that time and now, um, the town of Altadena was very much integrated. So it was hard to understand, what the problem was, because so many of my friends were African American and Latino um, and all kinds of other nationalities. So it didn't quite, in a young, child's mind, it was hard to figure out why this was going on.
Yeah.
And in those days, people used the term Negro
Mhm.
and the Negro rioters, and I was sort of like, um, well, my friends aren't Negroes. It's like it had some kind of value judgment to it that wasn't my experience of my friends of color.
Gotcha. So
Yeah, so right,
it was used in a derogatory way.
it's seemingly, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Isn't that interesting? It was
Yeah.
a term for something other than my experience of people of color. And actually didn't really know until much later in my life that I was a person of color.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, I don't know if you can see the picture behind me, but that's my mother. And my mom is from the West, was from the West Indies, and she passed away about 5 years ago. And her makeup was African, not African American,
Hmm.
African, partially Sephardic Jew, Sephardim from the Middle East.
Hmm.
So all of our lives, that element, there's so many different elements of ethnicity in our upbringing, but it was never pronounced. It was in that time period, you didn't talk about things like that. When
Right.
we were children, we figured it out ourselves, but we were never told specifically that her father was, my mom's father was, my grandfather was half black.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say you figured it out as kids, what do you mean?
Well, I'd look at the pictures and go, why aren't you telling us this truth? And I think that she and her sisters, because my cousins were the same way, none of us knew what our ethnicity was. I mean, we met Jamaican cousins later on, but no one, until we saw our Jamaican cousins and saw that they were actually black,
Hmm.
you know, light-skinned black people, did we, put it together that, wait a minute, so are we.
Yeah.
you know, we sort of, I think that the terminology that is extremely derogatory is that we passed.
Mm.
It's not a very, people don't say that fondly when they say those things, but I think that my mother did it for survival purposes.
Right. And for
Yeah.
people who don't know what we passed means. You wanna?
Right. Well, she was married to my father, who was a white man, a Southern white man. So, in several states at the time, it was illegal. Miscegenation was illegal. I don't even know how many states. That would be actually interesting to look up. And my father used to tell me when he was still in the picture that I could never come to the South because
really?
I would be discriminated against.
Interesting.
So here I am from Southern California to the South.
And have you experienced a difference in either how you've been treated or how you've seen other people treated between what you saw in Southern California and what you see in North Carolina?
Oh, sure. As far as I'm concerned, there's just as much racism in Southern California as there is in the South, maybe even more so. I mean, I think the whole term of driving while black, was coined on the streets of Los Angeles, on the freeways of Los Angeles. So it's just a different kind of racism. I mean, there's, segregated parts, or there used to be, like balkanized parts of the city. If you lived in Compton or in Watts, that was mostly made up of people of color. And then places like where I grew up in Santa Monica, there at first didn't seem to be very many people of color. But then as time went on, I realized that, as a kid, I went to school from 9 on through the Santa Monica school system and made friends that were definitely different ethnicities. But there were very, very wealthy people in Santa Monica.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
they all went to the same school. But as you were asking about the differences here in North Carolina, I think that people of color are more aware that I'm a person of color. Black people are more aware that I have, that makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas people in Southern California didn't seem to know or care.
How do you mean they know? I mean, what do you mean? People talk about it or they say something or?
They look at me and acknowledge the fact that I'm a Black person.
Okay.
At least, in my mind. But yeah, I think so. Or they look at me like, we know who you are.
Interesting.
It's comforting. I mean, maybe it's yeah. And it's interesting because all of my life, my best friends have always been women of color.
Yeah.
Yeah, my girlfriends that I, chose were that. So
yeah,
I must have seen them, and my very best friend is my college roommate. I went to college on the East Coast. We went to film school together, in the late 70s and early 80s, and she is also the same. She's West Indian and Jewish, and we're still very, very close.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of were drawn together,
right,
in that sense. But to answer your question, yeah, there are differences in the South, and that's probably the one that I would make note of, is that I'm recognized as being a woman of color here more so than I would be there.
right.
I mean, most people, I don't know, I think white people look at me and think that I'm white, or maybe they think I'm Jewish, or maybe they think I'm, Middle Eastern or something like that.
It's interesting that you say that because that's so accurate to how people see one another, right? They see each other and they say, oh, I wonder what ethnicity that person is, or oh, they make an assumption, oh, that person's Jewish, or that, we got to label everything, when in reality most of us are a mix, and why does it even matter? But it matters because it is affecting the lives of Black people and brown people so dramatically. I mean, it's killing them just because of their difference. from a white person, and it's horrible.
Well, for me, it seems like, in my mind, the way that I'm holding all of this is that it really forces us to look at the word equality and what equal everything for everyone, what that means. It doesn't mean that, you're going to treat someone more special than the others. You're just going to treat them the same.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a way, not even in a way, I feel really fortunate and grateful that I was, even though my mother didn't overtly talk about it, she always had that as what she taught us. You never, ever, ever look at anybody any differently than this one or that one. You should treat everybody equally. She was very, very staunch about that. And, I understand now why. I understood before, but I really understand now. And it would be wonderful to get to a point in our culture, in our society, where people actually did do that.
Mm-hmm.
Before I moved to the South, I lived in a place called Long Beach, California, and that's one of the most balanced, multicultural communities I've ever lived in. It's very, very mixed, and everybody pretty much gets along with each other. So at least that was my perception of it. I lived there for a long time.
That's
And
great.
so, yeah, it was
like an ideal, right? For the way it ought to be.
Yeah. But then, ironically, there's so many gangs, that come from Long Beach, and rappers. Snoop Dogg is from Long Beach.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know. At this age, you do definitely have a firm recollection of rioting and civil disobedience. This is happening currently on a worldwide level, which is very, very interesting and probably really good. But I remember episodes of civil disobedience that were, really alarming at the time. I was living in Los Angeles during the LA riots.
Mm-hmm.
And, Rodney King.
Yeah.
O.J. Simpson verdict, or all of those elements. And the city burned for, days. So this was somewhat reminiscent, but to hear about it on as broad a scale as it is right now, there's elements of it that are very, very disturbing, and some that are hopeful, and some of them that are completely opportunistic.
Oh yeah.
On both sides of the fence. Sure, all these corporations can rush to, throw down their ideas about, George Floyd and how, they're going to change, and then, you wonder, will things really change?
Right. What do you have anything in mind, any concrete ideas for what you think ought to change or how it could change? Or no, it's okay if you don't,
I think that I certainly don't think we should go back to normal. I don't think we will be able to.
I don't think
I don't think that we even have a sense of the full scope of what's happening to this society from the sense of a pandemic, but also on the sense of social change that is going to occur. Today as we speak, the stock market took another nosedive, and 1.5 million more people, applied for unemployment.
Right. And I think the fact that both the pandemic and the cry for equality are global. To me, it's really interesting in that I think our country, maybe I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people in our country have believed that uh, it's our country's problem. Like, oh, America was built, Europeans came here, started to settle, brought slaves. We had the Civil War, like I believe that a lot of people think it's a uniquely American situation as far as the racism, but to see the protests globally, and I have friends of many other races from many different places who experience it too, and who have said, oh, well, this group moved into our neighborhood, so now we weren't the ones that were discriminated, we weren't the worst anymore, that group was the worst. It's like there's always this hierarchy of race, there's a hierarchy of class. If you're not making a certain amount of money, or driving a certain kind of car, or living in a certain neighborhood, you're less than, you're not as smart, you're lazy, or whatever all these preconceived ideas are that I think too many people have. It's just really eye-opening to see it on a global scale, and to also see the number of people who are opposed to change, the number of people who are opposed to taking down Confederate statues. That the people who I thought there was a tiny margin of people who were still racist in our culture, to see that there's still as many as they are is really frightening.
But it's,
to see the scope of the protest is exciting, to see that there are so many more people of all different races coming together. But it still concerns me that there's the number of people in our culture, and probably around the world, who are still as racist as they are.
but on both sides of the fence. I mean, there's so much. There's a huge amount of racism, but our classism, and in some of the most liberal circles in America.
Yeah.
Having so much judgment and criticism of places they really don't know anything about.
Exactly.
And throughout history, it seems that when there's some kind of an economic crash, like during the Great Depression, it was like the great equalizer.
Mm-hmm.
There were people who had been, quite high, a high level of, our, what's the word, affluent
Mm-hmm.
class level, who were, cut down to very low level of, what's the word, they were just right down there with the people who were digging ditches at a certain point. And perhaps that's what will happen in this society, is that the equalizer will be the fact that nobody has any money, or everybody's struggling to survive. And maybe eventually people will all get a sense of, just like me.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that's something that is a qualifier that I would like to see. That less about, well, how come you're different, but more about how come we are so much alike.
Mm-hmm.
And, because factionalism, is rampant in all areas. I mean, you and I have talked about that before, that to get a room full of people to agree on one thing, let alone two, is no matter what strata of life they are in, have a hard time just agreeing.
Yeah.
And to me, the thing that's different than other times in history, in my history, is that the virus, one of the symptoms of this virus is hatred. And maybe that's the virus that's like the main symptom of this virus, is this incredible rage that everybody seems to be experiencing.
Yeah.
You know, and antagonism. And that's truly disturbing. I don't think I do remember a time in my life where hatred was occurring on such a mass, you know, scale. It's like a true zombie apocalypse in that sense.
Yeah.
And so the object is to, you know, come to a place of stillness and calm in ourselves, and a place of having compassion for ourselves and for everybody around us. You know, that's like the main antidote that all of us maybe have had some time to cultivate, being locked into our apartments and houses and whatnot.
So you said something that reminded me of your nun self. So you had talked about going to film school. So why don't you just say a little bit about, you know, your work in film, and then what your life was like, what choices, you know, path you took.
It's kind of extreme. And so I don't always talk about it because I'm not sure if people relate to it, but it is what happened. I, you know, worked in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles for probably 10, 12, maybe 15 years if I really looked at it closely, but I haven't for a while. And was doing that, and then 9/11 happened. And I had been studying Buddhism, you know, before 9/11 for a number of years. And in the Tibetan tradition, you know, the Dalai Lama is one of my main teachers, or my main teacher at this stage. And I just felt like there wasn't, after 9/11, I felt like there wasn't anything that was more important to do for myself or for the world than to devote myself to that spiritual practice. So I became a nun in the Tibetan tradition, and I, you know, the whole shave your head and wear the, you know, the maroon colored robes, and you know, live it, you know, in the world but not of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for about almost 8 years. And then, you know, I felt like I wanted to be more incognito and less overt. It was really hard. It was a hard thing to sustain, you know, to live that way and have a full-time job and care for my mother, who's in the background,
To live
which I
as a
did.
nun? You
Yeah.
lived as a nun and had a full-time job?
I did. Yeah. And was my sister and I were my mother's main caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and also travel with my teacher. I had an incredible teacher, a Tibetan Buddhist monk who was Tibetan and left Tibet in 1959 when the Dalai Lama did, when the communist Chinese invaded Tibet.
Yeah.
And systematically murdered, you know, millions of Tibetans. Yeah. And destroyed temples and monasteries. So I lived near him in California until he passed away in 2009.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, because the Tibetans are a refugee community, they don't really have the means to care for Western monastics, let alone Tibetan monastics. So you were pretty much on your own. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I wasn't able to like work as a field producer for the Discovery Channel with a shaved head and robes. So that work changed. And so I spent, you know, 15 years working, you know, for a nonprofit who did programming for seniors in affordable housing. And that's how I met you, through that organization in California.
And that's how you moved here.
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me think about the progression.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think that a lot of people, some people have an affinity for children and working with children, and some people have an affinity for working with
Mm-hmm.
older adults, with seniors. And that's always been my joy,
Mine too.
to be around the collective wisdom of older people is really a privilege. And actually did that with my mother. My mother traveled with me from property to property doing programming when she was alive.
Oh, did she? How
Yeah, and
wonderful.
my
I
car,
think that was great.
she was my mascot, I guess you could say. But she loved it too, and I think it prolonged her life. She had dementia,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually, she succumbed to it. But she was out there meeting people, every day of the week.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I think that's fantastic. I have no doubt that helped to, her to stay healthier longer.
Yeah, no, and I think it definitely prolonged her life. And you could tell that, little by little, she was going away. Like she couldn't hear as well and everything. But you get a sense when you're around older people that, they've endured a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That people who have lived through the Depression, who lived through World War II. I mean, I'm old enough that I've been around people, seniors, who actually remembered as children, World War I and the pandemic of 1918. I mean, I've spoken to people who remember all of that.
Right.
And so it helps to put things in perspective.
Right.
And that sense of learning how to be enduring
Mm-hmm.
without losing your humanity.
Mm-hmm.
To be kind no matter what is going on, to give people a sense of that they matter, that they have something to contribute. We should never lose that capacity.
Very well said, yeah.
So absolutely, Black Lives Matter. And yes, all lives matter. But for now, that's if that's something that people can rally behind and regain a sense of their own humanity, then that should be what the focus point is right now.
Right. And I think that's an important statement to make, because I'm not sure people understand the statement of Black Lives Matter and why it can be viewed negatively if somebody says all lives matter, because of course we all agree that people's lives matter, but white people aren't systematically being killed at the hands of police officers who are supposed to serve and protect. It's not, it doesn't, there is a completely different life that the African Americans in our country, at least the folks that I know that I'm friends with, their life is completely different. Their experience is completely different than my experience has been, simply because of their skin color, and I think it's really important to remind people of that, and particularly white people who maybe haven't had friends of other races, and maybe they're not consciously discriminating against someone. They're not consciously, making bad decisions or being selfish necessarily. They just don't know. They've never been exposed. And I've had a conversation with someone earlier this week that I was really stunned at, that this person was really completely unaware of sort of why things were happening as they are. And, some people are very sheltered, they don't have parents who tell them that it's wrong to discriminate against someone.
That's right. Yeah. Well, the thing that also that I have concern about, or I hope that people will take the time to sit and consider, is that, and let's say just in the last couple of years, there have been mass demonstrations around the world with hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating. There were mass demonstrations around the environment, you know, and Greta, you know, young Greta, and all of those people who were fighting for their future and the environmental degradation that's going on this planet, trying to change that trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
There have been numerous, episodes of Black Lives Matter demonstrations against discrimination and racial violence. There's also been massive demonstrations around immigrants
Mm-hmm.
in detention,
Right.
and the wall, and all of these demonstrations.
And the Me Too movement for women.
And the Me Too movement, how could we forget? But that's just it. We do forget, because the media I worked in the media for 10, 15, maybe 20 years. I have to think about it, but they're always looking for what's new and sexy. They're always looking for the soundbite. They're always looking for the thing that they can jump on board with and exploit.
Yeah.
And sell soap with.
Yeah.
We, caring, loving, concerned human beings of all, creeds, as they used to say, need to remember what all of that was about, what all of these different movements have been about. And it comes down to one word that will carry through all of them, and it's justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is justice?
Mm-hmm.
For all of these concerns, all of these protests, all of these bandwagons.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, the press moves on to something else. And that's why Black men continue to be murdered, because they moved on to something else that was hotter. The pandemic was what everybody was thinking about for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And everybody jumped towards, these heinous murders on camera.
Mm-hmm.
But if we come back to this idea about justice and what that means and how do we get it,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's a unifying element that we can all share. All of these movements pivot on the idea of social justice.
Mm-hmm.
The media is more than happy to, go to George Floyd's funeral, as it should be, and forget to mention the fact that we were all looted this year when all of this stimulus money went to things other than what it was supposed to go for.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
True. Whew. It's heavy. I mean, there's a lot when you start listing the issues, and yeah, I mean, on top of the pandemic, all of the social issues, and on top of it with the protests, okay, so I'm going to say this, but I want to preface it by saying that I spoke with 3 wonderful police officers this morning. They were fantastic, and I'm grateful for the police department, because I do think they have a place, right? But to see the disregard for human beings of all ages, of all races, genders, over and over and over again in these past 2 weeks, because they're not just showing, George Floyd, They're not just showing the young woman who got pushed down, or the older man who got pushed down, or the cars that the police cars that ran the protesters. You know, I mean, there are many that have happened recently, but then all of the old footage is being replayed and coming back, you know, because there are these reminders. So there's this collective evidence of misconduct and murder that's being shown over and over and over again. And it's you know, if there are people who at this point, with all of that evidence, who don't see the problem, then there's the problem, right? Like, what is wrong with those people who cannot see the reality that the rest of us see? You know, how do we get them to see what we see so clearly?
Well, I suppose that the first thing in my mind that is necessary is to take a step back and ask them what it is that they do see, and not immediately dispel it or criticize it or throw up our hands and say, you know, you're a racist, or you're an idiot, or all of the things that are all of the despairing terminology that's being used in the public dialogue right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's, you know, there's no respect on either side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing that I don't recall in the past.
Yeah.
That people, that the divide is a truly violent one.
It's
I mean, you and I,
wide.
You and I both know intelligent, loving, kind people in this state who also voted for the current president and intend to do so again. Do we completely, you know, what's the word? You know, tell ourselves that they don't matter, that they don't matter, right, that they're insane and they don't deserve a voice in the public arena? Is that going to help at all?
It's tempting to say those things, but you're right, it won't get us anywhere. And I think that's the greatest challenge, because yes, it is.
It's the hardest one of all.
It is.
As far as I'm concerned,
yeah,
it is the hardest one that everybody is having to cope with. You know, it's like it can be something as small as unfriending your friends on Facebook because they are still love the current president, you know, or the ones that openly demand, you know, that the current society be destroyed,
right,
violently.
Right.
You know, there's got to be some place in the middle where we can all.
That's the thing. I think that and I'm not going to delve into politics because I run the nonprofit here, and you know, it's not appropriate. But there does seem to be much greater extremes of political space. I mean, giant. And again, maybe I'm naive. Maybe it's always been that way. It's just been more hidden. And I suspect that is the case. It just so happens that we have a leader now who's willing to say things that have always been, right? They just weren't in the national spotlight like they are now.
Fanning the flames.
Fanning the flames, yeah.
And that's the illness.
Yeah.
That's the true virus. That's the true pandemic that we're all facing right now and being afflicted with or by.
Yeah.
And that, at least, you know, in my mind, that's what it seems like to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, even with it, we can't even all agree on how to exist during was that thunder?
That's thunder. Yeah, we have it's gotten quite dark outside, so we're probably about to have a big storm.
Yeah, I mean, we can't even agree on how to conduct ourselves during, an epidemic. How are we going to conduct ourselves properly in any other situation?
Right.
There's half the population in complete denial.
Right.
That if they don't, mind what's going on, they're going to die.
Yeah, unfortunately. And then, it's that people who just are in denial just don't believe that there's actually a
hoax
pandemic. Yeah, they and then on the other side of that, there are all these amazing people going out to peacefully protest for change and putting their lives at risk because they know that people of color's lives are at risk every day just because of their skin color, right? So it's just such a surreal situation that we're living through right now, and it's challenging. In addition to all the emotional aspects of it, it's so challenging because of the pandemic, because we don't know what's going to happen with that. So, the social unrest alone is huge, but to have it with the pandemic happening when we're just, we're trying to just figure out what tomorrow is going to bring, right?
Yeah.
Like every day there's something new. It's overwhelming. I don't even know. I mean, I start sentences and don't know how to finish them because I forget in the middle what it is I'm going to say. I mean, it's just weighing so heavily. The pandemic and the protest, and I would like to be out protesting. And I think you and I both talked about that. We have health reasons not to.
Yeah.
Serious health reasons not to.
Yeah. And it's an injustice to the healthcare workers that are putting their lives on the line.
Oh, it's so disrespectful,
Yeah. To go out there and willfully not observe the guidelines.
And I'm not talking about the protesters being disrespectful. I'm talking about the folks who are in denial, who are not following social distancing, who are not wearing masks. That I believe is disrespectful. Mm-hmm. I am all for the protests, and I have seen protesters wearing masks and keeping.
And they all should.
Yes, they should.
And I think
they're not all doing it, but they all should.
Yeah. Right. So, I suppose that if someone were to come to me and ask what I think, how to survive this, it's to recognize that we have a choice every moment, and to come into the moment and be aware of the moment and what are we acting on the basis of in the moment. Are we reacting, or are we actually doing something that's thought out and coming from a place of clarity? Because there isn't a lot of clarity.
No.
And to grasp at, security, grasp at the way things used to be, as opposed to embracing the certain change that is occurring, and staying present in this moment instead of, well, it used to be this way and I want it to be that way again. That's a hard one. As we age, we tend to, want to cling to our patterns and what we know, makes us feel like we're, in our safe zone.
Yeah.
Our safe zone may not be so safe anymore.
Right. It's interesting you say that. I mean, I think that's true of many people. I think it's also true that there are people who have certainly more adventurous personality types who always want something new and who thrive on the change, right? And it doesn't matter how old they get, they still want to make those changes. And I think that's been another thing that's been heartening during the protest, is seeing the number of older people. Not that I'm telling people to go out, because we know that's the age group at the greatest risk from COVID complications, but to see the number of older people that are out, that are white, that are out and protesting, to show our country that this concept that it's mostly older people who are racist, I disagree with that, because I've been working with older people for over 20 years, and I know many, 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 many people who don't feel that way, who are
It's ludicrous.
yeah,
Come
it
on.
is just to kind of but it's lumping it. It's doing the same thing that's done always. All Black people are this way. All Jewish people are this way. All old people are this way, right? It's another ism. It's racism. It's ageism. It's I don't know what the same term would be for religious. Putting religions into categories. What is that term? Do you know? I don't know. Loud thunder. Yeah, it's about to storm badly. Well, let me ask you, is there anything else that you would like to add or say before we sign off? Because I probably need to turn everything off just in case we get zapped by lightning.
Wow. I just think that if the more that we can come from a place of remembering that we're all the same, just like me. Maybe it sounds like a platitude, but there is no difference. In the broad stroke, the broad spectrum, there is no difference. We're all the same. We all want to be happy, and we all want to avoid suffering. And like that, we should treat everybody with the same, level of respect and understanding. And, it sounds like I said, it sounds so namby-pamby, but it is what I believe.
No, I think it sounds accurate and beautiful. I believe it too. I believe that too. I like the phrase "just like me."
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah,
that's my T-shirt.
Yeah,
just like me.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Surely, as you said earlier, certain change is coming.
Oh yeah, it's upon us.
All right. I will talk with you soon.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers. Stay safe.